Hey guys, this will be video 3 for the building a 1959 Korina Les Paul replica per StewMac templates. And I say 1959 because I'm beginning to kind of move in that direction a little bit more, because I had mentioned in the first part of the video I might keep this very general, but there's a possibility I'm going to focus on turning it into more of like the 59, because trying to build a custom is an enormous amount of work, and that's not something. This is not the type of project that you would build in component form and then hand over to somebody else and expect them to be able to pull off all the custom binding and all that work, because it is just that. This is an enormous amount of custom work. So anyway, where I'm going is, if someone's able to do that type of binding and they're really good at that stuff, they're probably able to build their own guitar as well. So anyway, in this video, I'm probably just going to focus on gluing the top down. And I'll talk a little bit, where's the tight bond? Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about the tight bond, which is a phenomenal glue. But I will be using the epoxy for this, because doing this in video series, it allows me to really keep the pressure off, keep the stress level really low, if not pretty much at zero. Whereas if I'm working with tight bond, I'm gonna kick off the camera and I'm just gonna do the job, because there's a window of there's a small window of work time there with the tight bond, and I hate that. I don't like being rushed, or either just the fear of feeling rushed. When I'm working with the epoxy, I know exactly what I'm going to be dealing with, and it's so much more enjoyable to do the job. So let me check the time. I'm going to start out. We're going to cover, I didn't really do a list, but we're going to cover a little bit of the weight analysis, just primarily for the record. And I may discuss the electronics a little bit more. If I forget, that's a 1/4-inch hole, and it will receive four wires like this. And I got a feeling I'm probably going to forget this. It will receive 4 wires, the braided wire, classic wire. So you would be able to run the master volume, or a DPDT switch or something like that, or a kill switch and all that jazz. So on that note, I really don't have to talk about the wiring, but if I do, we will cover a little bit more. But for the most part, I just want to do the weight analysis and then glue the epoxy down. I got the neck under control. I'm so happy with the neck. I've been doing the initial fit work, which I say initial fit work because I was using the templates. It pretty much just lined itself up immediately first shot. So I'm not going to cover the neck in this video though, because I really want to keep this video under 30 minutes or so. And there's plenty of stuff to talk about when we get to this top, and how I did this initial route work right there to allow some of the glue to come out. So there's going to be a ton of things that I end up segueing into and talking about. So let's do some weight analysis. I won't really do any comparatives because I don't want to get into the hypothetical world of what if we did maple versus European spruce top versus pine, or you name it. So it's just way too many different things you can end up. I did not do any more machine work. Let me just do a bit of a flyby first. We've already covered most of this, but I'm pretty bad about when I'm doing the video series. I'm moving so quickly that I don't really take the time to stop and show the beauty of the guitar, and I'm very happy with it. Again, I had mentioned this is going to have what's called a chevron flame, or matching, whereas the figure kind of goes down on a very shallow angle. It doesn't go down on like a 45 degree. It's probably about a 25 to 30 degree angle, but then the flame over on this side goes down, and it looks like it's book matched, even though it's not. It's not book matched, but it looks like it's book matched, and it's really beautiful. That's called chevron flame when it goes down, or it's a reversed chevron flame when the flame goes up. And we, as guitar builders, and when I was building jazz guitars, that was always a no-no. you just did not do reverse chevron flameing. Either have them completely mirror one another and be perpendicular, or a little bit of a chevron, which is really tasteful. Okay, so very happy with it. But again, I did no more machining other than just cut out some of these locations to allow a little bit of excess glue. If it got a little bit thick, it would have a little bit of an area to squeeze out to. And also it allows me to monitor it when I'm doing the glue up, which I will do before this video ends. Starting pounds first. She's supermodel light. 4.8562 pounds. 2,202 grams. And the additional machine work that it will receive will be obviously whatever pickup you go with here. That's going to lighten it up a little bit. That's probably the threshold for the bottom of the bridge pickup, other than it would have your little feet routed out of there. So in other words, you're not going to carve any weight off in that location, but you will carve some weight off in this location, and you will certainly carve some weight off in this location right here, because this is probably going to get cut down somewhere in that area right there, and I'm going to erase that because I might be deceived by that mark later on and think that's a point to work from. Because currently this is pitched at 2 degrees, just because when I started building this project up, I was really going to keep a very, very versatile platform and offer it in the event someone wanted to build like a flat top Les Paul custom, or a Les Paul special, or whatever. And I got to thinking, I looked at some of the prices that those guitars are bringing. If they're vintage, then yeah, they're worth an enormous amount of money. But this corporation, they started building so many of those at such a low price point, and even in a Korina, that it really, to me, it just killed the custom luthier market for building a flat top type guitar. Out of Korina is where I'm going with this. So I say all that to say this. That's not going to be 2 degrees. That's going to be cut to 4 degrees. So I will be relieving a little bit of mass in the material. But per this Stuart McDonald template right here, this will be a good digression. Okay, see that distance from the top of the lower to the top of the and I'm sorry, the thing's clear. I know it's hard to see, but I'm doing the best I can. I'll try to get real close to the camera. That distance is going to drop down, because right now it's 2 degrees. Once it gets cut to 4 degrees, I won't be taking much material out back here, but the material that will be coming out down here will allow this neck that was initially set at 2 degrees to now pitch down to the 4 degrees. Okay, so again, the templates are awesome because it allows you to kind of visualize physically what's in front of you, and especially if you've never built one before, because even though I had built quite a few guitars, the Les Paul is an insanely, or Gretsch, or anything small bodied. I call them the small bodied archtop jazz guitars. They were insanely humbling, and even though I had built a bunch of hollow body, jazz guitars per Benedetto specs, when I started fooling with these, I began to realize, wow, there's a lot going on here. And you think that's funny? I thought building the Flying V's was going to be a walk in the park. That's one of the most difficult jobs I ever figured out how to build, because you're having to keep everything really straight. Okay, you can hide a multitude of sins in all these curves right here, but when you got a straight, like 4 different angles, I believe, or 3 different angles, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, I'm looking at a Flying V over here on the wall. Very humbling. So anyway, so now that we know how much it weighs, we will be able to have that documentation for future reference. Yeah, let's talk about these electronics just for enjoyment purposes, and I'll try to keep it as light as possible. Um, but because I covered it enough in a chaotic fashion in the last video to let you know, there's a whole bunch of stuff you can do here. But there's also a whole bunch of stuff you don't have to do to keep it very, very traditional. So, and also the reason I like showing this in my video series is because if you're actually really serious about building your own guitar, um, I would strongly recommend buying, some everything that you see in front of you. The Switchcraft three-way, your output jack, because when you have these things in front of you, you know exactly how deep or how shallow you can drill a hole and get away with mounting that thing. If you're online and you're just looking at information, sometimes you get lost when it's so much easier to just you know pull this baby up right here. Or I love working with this straight edge. Very rarely do I even look at what the number is, but sometimes I'll just do something like this right here and go, okay, as long as I drill that hole that deep right there, I'm fine. And I won't even look at that number. I'll just start drilling the hole, and then I'll just put that up in there until it bottoms out. And then I know that thing will fit and clear. So when you've got these items in front of you, like your little double pole, double throw um, configuration, you might start seeing a guitar. I say might. This is exactly why I started building guitars, is because I love doing design work. I love doing layout work. And that's why I had brought up living in Franklin, Tennessee. Uh, I actually used to design architectural interiors for extremely high-end residences, and I met some incredible high profile people in the music industry within the first year of being up in Franklin. And it was really cool how they didn't see me as a threat, because they really needed my expertise to help them build their house. And when I say house, I'm talking $2, $3, $4 million houses sometimes, and some of them sometimes they were 15 or $17 million. But it felt really awesome for the phone to ring and it be someone that was on the country music television 3 weeks before, and they're asking your opinion about certain things. So I say all that to say this: I love doing design work, and it doesn't matter whether you're doing an interior or whether you're building a guitar. This stuff is so exciting, and you start seeing the guitar materialize that most people can't see. Even I might not see it until I put that I might not see that until I get to looking at it thinking, what if I turn that thing into a Gretsch or a Gretsch-esque? Or what if I did the whole Dan Huff mod, and if you have four conductor pickups, then you're able to do a series, parallel, and split. And in that world, it just introduces a whole different tonal palette for the session musician. And that's what I meant in the last video, where uh, rather than having to carry a Tele, a Strat, a Dan Electro, a Gretsch, and a Les Paul, and then a Dobro, well, maybe you just have your, one or two guitars, and then you dress them out like that right there. Because Dan Huff, a pro musician from the 80s, was probably one of the best pop guitarists ever. Man, his signature guitar, he had DP-DT switches on I think all three pickups in his Strat. So he just could get a myriad of different tones for the style of music he was playing. So anyway, but the reason I had brought up the whole Franklin, Tennessee thing was because I realized that, wow, man, I had that natural knack for the design work anyway. And then being a guitar player and a guitar builder, it just kind of materializes into, hey, I'll start building guitars a little more seriously. And that's what I meant by I didn't start building the small body archtop jazz guitars until about 2, 3 years ago. And I never really incorporated any of these things into this type guitar until just recently, where I started thinking along those lines. So, and anyway, I think I covered that enough to help you have or get a visual there of what can be done, or obviously what does not have to be done. And then once this top gets glued down, nobody will ever know that you almost drilled a hole in the back of your Korina. So, oh, and I'm glad I went ahead and continued to talk about that a little bit. You can do little things like this. If you're really scared to do this, or you're fearful of what it's going to look like, you could just take your potentiometer and measure the minimum size hole that it needs to be able to fish the wire through, or the whole potentiometer through. And then you can determine, well, if that's all I got to drill, I'm not worried about weakening that horn. So yeah, maybe I will do that. But if you were having to drill, where's the other? Well, just if you were having to drill a hole that big right there, I'd probably recommend not doing that unless you came in and just flooded it with an enormous amount of CA glue, which I did. As soon as I did all this machine work, heavily saturated that with very thin CA glue, which I call jet glue, and then I saturated it right here and right here, just in the event this guitar dropped and it just by chance hit right there, it would give it some structural integrity. Otherwise, this being quarter sawn material, that would probably break off right there. Not just on this guitar, any guitar. Once you get the mahogany glued on there, it'll give it an enormous amount of structural integrity though. One thing that is pretty important, and then I will be through talking about that. When I had mentioned, yeah, you just feed the wires through the lower control cavity in that direction, I'll go ahead and do this and show you what I meant. Because it really won't take probably 10 minutes worth of camera time to glue the top on. It's so hard doing stuff on camera because you're trying to make certain that people can see what you're doing. Okay, so what I meant, all this has got a top on it. You can't access it back here. You do not want to do any goofy route work back here. You only want a very non-invasive hole, just enough to get the potentiometer through there. But you can't pre-wire the potentiometer, the master volume, with like the treble bleed network. That's where I should have been going with this, because the whole idea about doing a master volume, you're able to do like a Kinman treble bleed network, which just changes everything. So, but if you pre-wired that master volume potentiometer with a treble bleed network system, you would not be able to feed it through here, because it'd be dumb effing luck if you even hit that hole with just one of the wires, let alone two. Okay, now you could do some fissure. You could stick a wire through and connect them and pull it through. Yeah, I guess you could do that. It wouldn't be that difficult. But where I was going with this, typically what I would do, I would just feed these wires through from down here, and then you drill that hole in the back, and then you just fish them out the back. Okay, they're sticking out the back. Wire up your Kinman, or there's another treble bleed design that you can do, but I always do the Kinman, and then you feed it all through there, and then you put the little cover on, because the only thing you had to do up here was just drill a 3/8 inch hole, very narrow, very small hole. Okay, so, and then if you were to do the double pull, double throw, then you would be, in other words, series split and parallel switching for 4 conductor pickups. Then that would need to be yeah, that would need to have your four conductor. Just imagine these are your four conductor pickup wires coming out of the coming down from the pickup, uh, the wiring harness route, and then it would horseshoe and go into there, but it would go all the way up here and be fed out, and you would do all your wiring out here and then feed that DPDT switch back through. So it would get a little bit congested in there, but from a functional standpoint, if you're a session musician, that would be just like a heavenly item to have. Okay, so I'm gonna stop talking about that stuff because first off, I'm not all that good at doing wiring enough to kind of explain it in a real easy fashion. But I always look at things from a structural standpoint of it's not that big of a deal to drill a little bitty hole right here, and the sky's the limit as to what it will allow you to do. Wouldn't get too crazy, but usually because with the double pole double throw you can get one that is a double width, therefore you can control both pickups with one switch. Or you could do like the Eddie Van Halen mod where you maybe you have the master volume here, but then right behind it you have the push button kill switch. I can't think of the name of that. It's really impressive little button. That would be kind of cool because I know that's where Eddie had his on his guitar. Apparently, whenever he was doing his playing, that was a real good location for him to be able to kill switch through a button fashion rather than doing a quick toggling. Okay, so a lot of fun from the design standpoint, and it's really neat. Again, wouldn't do that on an R9 or anything vintage, original, and very valuable. But if you've got a chambered out guitar that's you're curious about doing something cool and custom, then sky's the limit. All right, check time. 22 minutes of electronics rambling. Let's talk about these templates a little bit. Apparently this is going to be over a 30-minute video. That's the back side. And I've got it all cleaned and wire brushed and washed down with lacquer thinner and opened up and got the grain open. I'm just being really careful about keeping it protected. But I might have lost some of you from the standpoint of I know I at least lost one person. So let me clarify what I was talking about. Is that the point? Yeah. There's a point in and a well, I'm just struggling today for some reason. Looking through two pieces of acrylic, there's a reflection there that you can't, or it starts prisming. Is that a word? I'm trying to find this here. Okay, let me get the right of it. All right, I like the idea of having these access holes here because it allows a lot of the glue that's in these areas to get squeezed out, and it helps me keep it really, really clean. When I say glue, I'm talking about epoxy. But the way I did this is I actually put some tape down. Well, I'll just call it double-sided tape. I did double-sided tape between the lower template and the mahogany, and then I did double-sided tape between the upper surface of the lower template and then the back side of the upper template. Okay, then I set the router bit bearing, I set the bearing halfway in between both templates, and then I machined all of that out. I did some relief work with Forstner bits and then routed all that out, making certain that my bearing, once it passed over here, it was always making contact, whether it was transferring from making contact with the lower only or the upper only, or at certain times both of them. And then that gave me that. I didn't even have to think. I didn't have to measure. I didn't have to do anything. but just make certain that these two templates were very secure, and that way I got that mass of wood out of the way. Now, when I come up here, okay. Now when I come up here, in the event, I'm almost certain there's no way I could forget about this because I'm gonna have to show it on camera. But what was it I did? Yeah, I just went ahead and drilled two very small locator holes right there, because you'll see this in play later on. And I went ahead and I drilled the location holes first in the Honduran mahogany on the drill press. Did not try to drill into that. But then I came up here, see, that was perfectly aligned. All that's perfectly aligned. And then I'm getting this top exactly where I want it in relation to that right there. And then I clamped it down, and with these in place, then I was able to take my hammer and go boom, 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 and drive it all the way down, and drive that one all the way down. So now, and then I was able to take my hammer, and lift it loose. These were sticking all the way through. Tap them out, got them out. Now when I do all my epoxy work or all of my glue work, these 4 locations back here and these 2 locations up here are going to take my stress level down to 0, because I'm going to know for a fact that I'm not going to run the risk of this thing slipping even just a 64th of an inch when I start really putting some serious clamping pressure on it at the end of the video. Okay, so just be thinking along those lines. And also, if you wanted to, you could make some marks here, alignment marks, but I don't have to do that because I'm so confident with that point right there, this point right here, you name it. I could pretty much just reference anything as I'm clamping it up. The reason I bring this up, because if you're working with a tight bond is just, it's so slippery, and you're tempted to stop clamping so that it will stop slipping on you, but then you run the risk of having too much glue in there, and that's why I just like using the epoxy. But with all these alignment locations and all of this initial dry machine work, I'm guaranteed that I can look at this guitar from over here and tell you, yeah, it's perfect. Or if there's something weird like that going on, it's like, whoa, wait a minute, something's wrong. Or maybe one of these little bamboo skewers is like 1/3 the dimension of the others or something, because they're not machined. And I'm not, sometimes I actually just go ahead and put the drill bits in there. I probably will do that with this, but you got to make certain that you don't leave those drill bits in there, because any epoxy that's down there will do exactly what it was designed to do, and it will be permanent. So let me check my list here. I think that's pretty much everything, and I spent a lot more time talking about the electronics than probably should have, but I definitely wanted to, if that makes any sense, because I love talking about that type stuff. And I think if you're coming on a video series like this, you're intrigued by doing things differently. So let me pause and get the table cleaned off a little bit. I'm going to mix up some epoxy and let it be kicking a little bit, and then I'll come back and I'll have the table cleaned off and we'll glue this top on. Okay, this has been kicking for about 5 minutes, which is plenty of time. Usually 2 to 3 minutes is plenty when you're doing a 2-part epoxy. Oh, there's a fly in here. And usually how I start is by just sealing the grain, or just sealing the cap, the backside, and I mean virtually no thickness, no mill thickness whatsoever. I'm going to do the best I can to stay out of the camera, or stay out of the view of the camera, but do the job. The great thing about doing this job is I got plenty of time, and you should be able to hear it in my voice through the whole process. Let me see if that's even in the camera where I'm doing that work. It might be a little. Let me get this over here. That'll keep me from making a mess. But you should be able to hear it in my voice that I don't ever get stressed out when I'm working with epoxy. And if you lay the blade down real flat, well, then you'll start building up a mill thickness. But when you cut it stand that blade up, you'll cut it. Again, all I'm doing here is getting epoxy in the grain. I'll contend with mill thickness when I'm doing that. I think there's a little, there's a cricket in there. Not sure what that is. No sense in filling those holes. Because it would probably create a vacuum lock when you try to put the little bamboo skewers down in the body. I want to keep that as clean as possible. And I will do this part of the job, then I'll pause the camera again, mix up some more epoxy, and I got to tape off the sides of that body like I said I would, which I almost forgot, but that's one of those things that as soon as I started doing the job, I would have realized, oh, wow, I got to tape that body off. There's no way I can chance letting this epoxy contaminate the sides. A lot of people are fearful of working with epoxy because they think it's, intended more so for the really advanced workers and stuff like that. And I get that, but my theory is this: if you're working with a 24-hour time, it gives you so much. It gives you so much work time that, to me, I think this should be more intended for the beginner. Because it's so forgiving from a time frame standpoint, and you can really like experiment to a degree with mill thicknesses and stuff like this. I do the best I can to keep that clean, but I want that to stay on the table. So, and what's amazing is and I did not even. Sometimes I'll put acetone in it to thin it out a little bit, but I didn't really see the need in doing this. It's a good mix. The T88 is a West System epoxy. I used that a lot in South Florida when I was restoring a beautiful old vintage boat that I have. It's a Post Sportfish 1973. It's a cedar Carvel planked hull on mahogany and mahogany longitudinals and a white oak skeletal frame. And so I say that to say this: I got pretty you-know-what good working with epoxy, restoring that boat. That boat was at a point to where it just about needed to be condemned, but brought it back to life, and got really good at. I was buying epoxy in gallons, quarts and gallons, and made friends with a professional painter and boat restorer in Fort Lauderdale. His name is Larry. Super cool guy. And man, he taught me so much about the molecular aspects of working with epoxy and things like that, and how critical it is to not rush it and make certain that you mix everything properly. And, you know, when you're working with chemical, it's one thing, but when you're working with chemicals that are designed to, glue a boat together or an airplane, this is the same thing that you would use to build an airplane, like experimental aircraft. It's important that you get that right. So let me pause, and I'm going to tape off this body and then mix up a little bit more epoxy. We'll go from there. Let me pause. Okay, we'll dive back in. It's been about maybe 15 minutes tops. Probably not that long. It kind of felt like it. But had to get the tape on the sides. And when you mix your epoxy, it's really important that you let it kick on a molecular level for, a good 2 to 3 minutes. But the cool thing about doing a job like this, you're going to be preoccupied setting up different steps and preparing to do the job. So it's very unlikely that you're going to do it like a tight bond and just pour it on and be ready to glue it down. So, but forgetting to do things like that tape was not really that big of a deal because I had the work time with the epoxy. There's a little fly in here. I may pause and kill him, so we'll see. If he starts trying to get in the work, that'll be a different story. It doesn't take much epoxy, that's for certain. And if you notice, I'm holding this on about a 30 to 40 degree angle now. I'm kind of building a little bit of a mill thickness there. There's not a lot of area because there's so much route work. And the fact that I covered every bit of that, it acted as a sealer in the areas that will not be attaching to the lower. But I can feel it. I'm building a little bit of a mill thickness here. I ran out of, I usually use parchment paper, which is for like baking cookies. But I just have the regular, I can't think what you call it, the clear paper, wax paper. And it has a tendency to tear. But I definitely recommend mixing your chemical on either a parchment paper or a wax paper so that you get a really good molecular bond between the two different chemicals. If you mix it on paper, the paper is going to absorb, well, if anything, it'll probably absorb equally, but it may not. It may absorb more of your resin than it does your hardener, and then it throws everything off. I do know that once the paper gets wet, it starts kind of tearing on you, and it just ends up being a mess. There's a part of me I'm kind of pushing this into the grain, but I've got that grain so well opened up, and I forgot to mention I even went across it with a wire brush. I may have mentioned that. I went across it with a wire brush and really brushed with the grain, and then vacuumed all of that out, and then rinsed it with the lacquer thinner in order to really wash it clean and open up the grain. So this will be a phenomenal glue up. Otherwise, when you do all your sanding, there's an enormous amount of dust in there. And I'm probably going to have to pause and mix up just a very small amount. But it's really amazing how it goes a long way. So we'll see. And that's still just as tacky as it was when it was first mixed up. There really shouldn't be much squeeze out, if any at all. Well, I say that. Seems like no matter how thin I go with the epoxy, there's always squeeze out. Even so much so when I first started doing the epoxy with respect to guitar building, I couldn't help but put a little bit too much, and then I kept getting all the squeeze out, and I realized, man, it really doesn't require much, especially once you really compress it down into the grain on both surfaces. Because notice how, well, let's look at this. See how much is there? That's quite a bit. Check the time. 41 minutes. This is probably the equivalent of watching paint dry. I am going to pause because I need to mix up just one more small batch, and then we'll go from there. Okay, let's dive back in. A bit of a flyby. And, oh, and I'm glad I did that. I just saw a dry spot. Tell you what, let me find the dry spots. Oh, wow, yeah, I see a few dry spots. All right, I got some dry spots right there. And a little bit right there, not much. Nothing that would be detrimental. But a lot of times when I say a lot of times, I used to put the epoxy on a little bit thicker, and then I would put the cap on, and then put the clamps on it, and then actually remove the clamps and pull the top off and assess it. And and come in here and clean up corners and stuff like that where I had runoff. But I now know how much epoxy to put on there that I don't have to do that anymore. And it wouldn't hurt if we did, but I'm not going to do it. I did do it in that other build, the gold top build over there. If you want to see that take place, there's nothing wrong with that. That way you're really able to gauge your glue up. But it looks really good. I got a little bit of a run over right there. If you got a bead right there, it is definitely going to turn into it's going to roll off a little bit, which is not a big deal, because once this glues up, when I clamp it up, I'm going to invert it and let it dry with the top of the guitar down, so that if there is any squeeze out, it'll just create like a little welded bead all the way around that area. And see what I'm saying? See how wet it still is? It's amazing. So there's still plenty of work time, but I don't like the idea, since I've got it this thin, it's not thin, it's just the perfect amount of, once I put that cap down, I want to leave it down. I'm a little bit thick right there. I know you should use gloves, but even when I was working on my boat in South Florida, I was talking to Larry about this, and he was like, man, I can't wear gloves either, because of the gloves just stick to everything, or I make such a mess. And now working with chemicals against your skin is not advised. We all know that. But sometimes, you gotta live on the edge a little bit. Small price to pay for such a cool guitar. There's another reason for that. You can use it to hold. And since I machined that exactly to the specs, I'm just gonna do a very small amount of movement, but not much at all. You know, usually when you're gluing tight bond, you know, you're really sliding and you're working the glue out. But with this type stuff right here, you don't want to do that. Well, I'm not sure what just happened, but I hit the pause button, and apparently I hit it twice. I have no idea what I might have thought was being recorded, but in all actuality was paused. So I apologize if there was some sort of weird jump, but I'll just go back through it very quickly. What I did, I put epoxy on the lower and I put epoxy on the top. I know we saw that part. Had it very thin, found a few dry spots, touched it up, and then discussed sometimes I clamp it on there and then I pull out, then I put a little bit of pressure on it, then I remove it just to assess it. But I don't feel the need to do that anymore because I'm so good at assessing how much epoxy to put down that I just once I put it in place and I drive the bamboo skewers down, clipped in, and then I drove my two little brass nails in place. And in the event something weird happened and I had to chisel them out, it doesn't matter because they're up under the fretboard location anyway. It's a paint grade top. If I had to do a little bit of epoxy repair, it's not the end of the world. But then I paused again and I mentioned, okay, all you're doing now is just getting this initial clamp on here and just putting very minimal pressure. But I did mention that once you're using the quick grip, if you put the quick grip on like this and you start really torquing, sometimes it has a tendency to start pulling. So make certain that your quick grip is in line best possible. And it's okay to go ahead and put a little bit of encouragement behind it. I'm not too worried about what's going on out here. If there is any squeeze out, I'll try to pick it up. I don't think there's going to be. But I will say that, I say that to say this. When you get really good at working with epoxies and stuff like that, and these are just really clean machine straight edge, it's not really quarter sawn, but it's extremely strong. But when you get really good at your assessing your chemicals, you just know roughly how much is the appropriate amount, and obviously how much is too much as well. And you just build the guitar. Let's see. Yeah, I'll go ahead and, yeah, there's nothing wrong with this right now because remember how I mentioned I'm going to flip this upside down. But if you had really long cabinet clamps, it's really, I used to say, you better be prepared. You know, if you have cabinet clamps that are sticking up really, really long, well, it's no big deal. You can just turn it over and turn it into a table. Set it over in the corner and let it sit there. See, I've got that piece of yeah, I got some squeeze out there. Beautiful. What was I talking about? Doesn't matter. Because you're gonna be flipping it over so that gravity can take its course. And Oh, I know what I was going to say. I got the I got that piece of 1/4 inch plywood up under there, so that I don't have to worry about putting dents in the back of the guitar. But when you're working with the epoxy, you do not have to do crushing pressure to glue this top together. One thing I will say, you do want to monitor it, because what little bit of pressure you may have on it right now, if you come back in, first off, I'd say don't leave it. But if you come back in 5 minutes, you'll reach up here and these will be loose because the epoxy will have squeezed a little bit. So I got beautiful squeeze out going on there. Really happy with that. And that's what I was talking about, how even when I put a very thin amount of epoxy, it's like this stuff is there's still plenty of squeeze out. Okay. So let me get a longer clamp. And I'm going to turn this thing into a coffee table. And set it over to the side. And therefore let gravity take its course. And I apologize if this is not in the camera very well, but I do want to get the job finished. So. See, the length of these 4 clamps right here are identical, or they're close enough close enough to rockabilly, so that you can stand it up, and therefore let gravity take its course. Okay. And then just come in here, just do a little bit. Again, it doesn't need much, but you will need to monitor it over the next 15 minutes to an hour. And if there is squeeze out, well, then just clean it up and deal with it accordingly. The good thing about this project is being paint grade. If you were doing if you had an extremely valuable figured top, then I would say we need to slow down and work a little bit more cautiously with some of this squeeze out, so that we don't make a mess. But this is all pretty safe. Again, working in front of the camera is kind of tricky, because you're trying to, keep everything on camera, but nonetheless do the job as well. So just want to clean it up a little bit so it's not just crazy messy. But one thing I've noticed about working with the epoxy, once you get that squeeze out right there, that's probably pretty much going to be the excess of it. So check the time. 53 minutes. Feels like it's been an hour and a half, because it pretty much has, between the pausing. 53 minutes. What can I talk about? Horror stories. What could go wrong? I think the main thing that could go wrong is you got way too much epoxy or way too much glue, and you're freaking out because the stuff's just water falling out. If you ran into that situation, if it's tight bond and it's a horrific amount of glue squeezing out and just slipping around, I'd say pull the cap off, clean it, wash it, wire brush it, let it dry, flip the lights off, and approach it again another day. If it's epoxy, then you just you monitor it accordingly. See, this is awesome. I'm getting just a little bit of squeeze out. But if you've got a horrific, if this epoxy just kept on and kept on and kept on and kept on, well, then you might want to, pull that cap and just double check it, make certain that those uh, cavities in there where you chambered it are not filling full of you know what, because I do want to get this flipped over within about 3 minutes to 5 minutes, so that if there is, because if there's squeeze out here, there's going to be a little bit of squeeze out on the inside as well, and I want to make sure that that stuff puddles around um, the identified location where I chambered it, rather than running down the wall of the chamber. Okay, so on that note, I don't think there's anything else to talk about. I'm gonna pause the video, get this thing flipped over, and then I may come back and talk about some other stuff. Otherwise, I'm probably just going to end the video. So I appreciate you guys dropping in, and I'll see you in the next video if I don't see you in the next second or two.